What's up guys, my name is George, and today we're going to be talking about one of my personal favorite watches, and that is the Omega Seamaster 300. Before we get into this 2020 model, let's talk about the history about the Omega Seamaster. So to kind of explore the history of this iconic watch, we have to go back to the 1930s. In the 1930s, Omega released a watch called the Omega Marine. Now this watch was the first watch to kind of be waterproof. I mean, it had this very complicated case design that allowed it to go diving. So pretty much, technically the first dive watch, but there was no actual rotating bezel on it. The design was, I would say, more similar to something like the Cartier tank, kind of a square design. But that was kind of the ancestor of the Seamaster. Fast forward to the 1940s, when World War II, and Omega issues a three-hand watch to the British Army. Pretty much every soldier was equipped with this, but most of the iconic ones were worn on the wrist of pilots in the Army for the British service. So this watch was just a basic, three-hander, simple movement, but very rugged and very dependable. They're bulletproof almost. I mean, if some of these watches survive today, they're still pretty accurate and they're still, in good condition. You can wear them today and they'd be pretty relevant, honestly. But we fast forward another 10 years, the war is over, it's peacetime. Omega decides we need a new product. So they create something that's more of like the civilian version of that watch that soldiers wore in the war. And that watch was called the Seamaster. So the first Seamaster was just a simple three-hand watch with no rotating dive bezel. That's right, it didn't even have a dive bezel in the first stages of the line. Heading to the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Omega Seamaster finally got a dive bezel, but the design changed quite drastically. While its main arch rival, the Submariner, stayed pretty much the same. Maybe they changed, the text on the dial, simple stuff like that. The Seamaster would go through drastic changes until 1995, when they released what we kind of now know or see as the iconic design of the Seamaster 300M. In 1998, GoldenEye came out, and this was the debut of Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. At the time, this watch, or the original version of this watch, I should say, came out with a quartz movement, and it was worn on his wrist during the movie. In the second movie that he made, he wore the 253180 reference, which is the most iconic watch of this line, still to this day. And that was really the watch that cemented the design of the Seamaster. And finally, Omega had a design they could kind of innovate on and work on, but it's something that was recognizable now and wasn't always changing so drastically. The watch I have in front of me is a 2020 Omega Seamaster 300M. And really, there's a couple changes. Well, actually, I should say there's a lot of changes versus the older ones. If you watch my collection video, I have an older version of this watch from 2017. This new one is completely different. Right off the bat, the first thing you notice is it's bigger. It's grown from 41 to 42, and it's a little bit thicker. Now, as a Seamaster enthusiast, that kind of annoys me a little bit because the Seamaster was always known to be a dressy diver. You could wear under a suit, you could put on a Nato strap or rubber and it would look great. This looks a little more on the sporty side versus the dressy side. So they're kind of moving in that direction. With that being said, on the wrist, it doesn't really wear that big or that thick. It's just a little disappointing that they had to kind of raise it a little bit and make it a little bigger. But because of that, they were able to add in a new movement. So now under the hood, we have the in-house 8800 caliber Omega movement. This is purely in-house, not by ETA, none of that. It's straight up made by Omega and it's meta certified. What does that mean? So the first thing it means is that it's super anti-magnetic, up to 15,000 Gauss. That's about 2 times more anti-magnetic than the Rolex Gauss, which is, that's the purpose of that watch, and this is a diver. So it has basically extreme anti-magnetic properties. The second thing is accuracy. This watch is insanely accurate. If you look at a typical Submariner, they range from +2, -2 a day. This watch does -0.5 or +0.5. I mean, guys, you cannot get any more accurate than that unless you're going with a quartz movement at that point. So this movement is definitely a powerhouse. Besides the new movement and the size, they've also changed the date window to the 6 o'clock position. Now, personally, I'm pretty neutral about this change. I don't really care. I don't really care if it's on the 3 o'clock or the 6 o'clock. It looks fine both ways. But what I do like that they've changed is finally the date window actually matches the color of the dial, which kind of annoyed me with my, my older one. So that's something they improved. The second thing they changed is the helium escape valve design. I personally don't love it, and I think it's a little uglier than the older version. So personally, I like the old school version, but they already changed it, and most people like it, but personally, I don't love it too much. And then the last thing they've done is that they've put a ceramic dial on this watch. So not the bezel. The bezel is ceramic, but the dial is made out of zirconium, and it's ceramic, and it's sick. I mean, it's straight up just, it's kind of like a old school wave pattern from the 1995 version, but in ceramic. So it looks way more dynamic. When the light hits it, it looks absolutely fantastic and definitely adds to the pedigree of the watch. When I look at to buy a watch, I look at the pros and cons. So what are the pros of this Omega Seamaster 300? Well, right off the bat, the price. I mean, this watch retail is $5,200. If you look at its competitor, like for example, a Submariner here, if you can even get this, because if you know, the AD dealers right now are not even letting you buy a stainless steel Submariner. They're around close to 10,000, so about double the price. Is this watch double the price of this Omega? I personally don't think so. Another pro that the Seamaster has in its favor is the movement. Now the 3135 and for example, the Rolex Submariner here, it's a fantastic movement, don't get me wrong, but there's no open case back. If you do open the case back to look at the movement, it's kind of an ugly movement, I'm not gonna lie. It's very utilitarian looking. It doesn't look like someone who designed it kind of has any passion. Oof, that might hurt some Rolex fans. But the Omega has an open case back, you can see the movement and it's finished to a T, it looks fantastic. And it's pretty impressive to have an open case back on a dive watch. They're supposed to be kind of closed tight, you're not supposed to see anything. But this watch has an open case back and really it adds that kind of character to the watch. As we know, no watch is perfect. So what are the cons for this Omega Seamaster? Well, right off the bat, a lot of people don't like the design of the bracelet. They say it's very 1990s. I could see that perspective, but I personally grew up loving this watch's design of how different it was. And to me, the bracelet doesn't look dated. But to many people that look at this watch, they say, not a fan of the bracelet, would put it on rubber, or maybe put it on a Nato. I get that. I mean, at least you have the option to swap it out, which is good. The second con I would say about this watch is the helium escape valve. Not the fact that it exists, but the way to grip it, to unscrew it, is really awkward on this watch. I feel like it's worse than the older version that I also own. I don't know why they even played with that. I thought that was a random thing to kind of change. But yeah, the grip is just not great. The third con for the Omega Seamaster, in my opinion, is the lume. Now, like I said, I have the 2017 version of this, and the lume, even on that watch, although it is cool, it has two colors, one hand is green, one hand is blue, it's just not that strong. And I would think in this new one, they would improve it. But to be honest, it seems like they're using the same lume, at least from what I can tell from my eyes. So that's another con that kind of annoys me. I feel like that should have been improved, but it was overlooked. The fourth con, and to me this doesn't bother me personally, is that the bezel design is a scallop instead of the Rolex Submariner's coin edge design. What does that mean? Well, if you're a diver, it's much easier to turn a coin edge bezel versus a scalloped one. But I will say the scallop looks way cooler in my opinion. The fifth and final con for the Omega Seamaster is recognition. So if you paid attention to my history part of this video, we know that this design changed drastically over the years. Where this, the Submariner's been the same for many, many years. Yes, maybe they've added crown guards, they've changed the text on the dial, they've maybe made a precious metal like I'm wearing right now, an all gold sub. But they've pretty much stayed the same, guys. It hasn't really changed that much. The last maybe 15 years, they've added ceramic, that's about it. Where the Omega from its kind of birth in the 1950s has changed so many times until 1995, where they kind of had a staple design with the Bond era. And then they finally got to this, which is them just innovating and pushing the bar, further into being different. So that's something that affects collectors in the sense that most people will not recognize this watch versus the Submariner, which has just been around longer in the sense of its consistency. And it's just gonna affect people in terms of just, hey, is this a nice watch or not? So that's something to consider if you're collecting. Today we talked about the Omega Seamaster and its history. And really my closing thoughts on this piece is that it's a watch that I recommend to all collectors if they're under the 5,000 range. Hell, even if you have more money, I would still add one to the collection. It's a legendary watch that deserves a spot in your watch box. But to me, if you need one watch, you have $5,000, this is the one to get. It's good if you want to wear under a suit, slips under a cuff dress shirt, and you can take it off the bracelet, that's very dressy, put it on a rubber or Nato, and it'll look fantastic, no matter what scenario you're in. With that being said, guys, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys on the next video.